Stealing by Duffy. The most important way to start is obviously to look at the title. And the first thing you'll notice about this is the speaker seems to have no input into the title. The title is about all people. Again, Duffy is trying to be universal. Stealing is something that happens to all of us, sadly, and that many of us have done. So Duffy is playing quite an interesting game here, and the first thing she withholds from us is the gender of the speaker. We might associate stealing with masculinity and being male, but of course this protagonist could be female. And is she making a wider point about how men and women behave, or is she just leaving us to make up our own mind? The first verse begins like listening to one side of a conversation. So she's obviously, or he's obviously, being asked a question. What's the most unusual thing you've ever stolen? And the answer is a snowman. And this is perhaps our first clue that the speaker is in fact female. And the second clue is this: she's stolen the snowman because it's a mate. And a male thief would have a mate that was a friend. But I think as we look at the language in this verse, we'll see that it's quite sexual, and it's probably a female protagonist we're talking about. So I'll stick to that through this poem, although you can of course reverse that. The snowman is stolen at midnight, a time that we might associate with romance, but also evil, and it suggests that there is an evil intent here as well as a sexual one. Then if we look at the description, the snowman is magnificent and tall. It's a kind of stereotypic description of the tall, handsome stranger. But what appeals to her most is the fact that it can't speak. It can't answer back, it can't criticise. And that's our first clue as to why this person is a thief. Perhaps they've been exposed to quite a lot of criticism. I wanted him a mate with a mind as cold as the slice of ice within my own brain. And here we've got a simile, and it's a predictable one, isn't it? It's very dangerous to use a stereotypical cliche of a simile at the beginning, and I think Duffy does it to try and show the mind of the speaker is filled with cliches and is actually not able to think outside its own experience. I started with the head, and straight away we've got this practical image. That's the smallest part of the snowman, and you'd lift the head off and carry it, but it's also a sexual image, and she started off giving it head. Now I haven't just made this up, this is the sort of thing she's done before in Salome, where Salome wakes up next to the head of John the Baptist, and she makes a great play of this double meaning in the word head. And in that poem there was his head on a platter, has a very strong sexual connotation. A possible reason for the sexuality in this first verse is that she really wants us to dislike this protagonist. And here's another way that she does it. Look at this repetition of I. This is a person who's self-obsessed and in fact unable to think of other people and how they will feel. And that's mirrored in this attraction to words that are full of eyes: midnight, magnificent, white, winter, mind, within, with, slice, ice. And that's not coincidental. It's a kind of mantra. This person is completely and utterly self-absorbed, and even the mate that they want is one that's just like them, with a mind as cold as the slice of ice within my own brain. This is a person obsessed with the mirror, the ultimate narcissist. In the second verse, she explores motive a little more fully. Better off dead than giving in. This is another cliche, and of course quite untrue. I'm sure the speaker would much rather be alive than dead. Not taking what you want. And this is an attempt to make us complicit, addressing us, the reader. But actually, it's not us that behaves this way. He weighed a ton, his torso frozen stiff. Again, this sexual imagery. First, there's the desirability of the male torso, and then stiff, which obviously has a double meaning, which I won't labour for you, as does that, hugging it to her chest. And then this kind of image of impregnation. So as a metaphor, a fierce chill piercing my gut obviously describes the cold, but the idea of piercing leads us towards impregnation, as though she wants to reproduce another version of her. And that's immediately picked up on with her next thought, children. So she goes straight from her gut to this thought of children, and it's ironic because it doesn't seem that she'd ever form an attachment that was close enough to become a mother to a child. And then there's the irony of this final two lines of the verse, that actually she only wants children to cry in the morning, perhaps as she did with her tough upbringing, and she wants to teach this lesson: life's tough. And it's a very shallow ambition, isn't it, just to reproduce your own life in others in some empty way of getting revenge. And the fact that the fierce chill pierces her gut shows how empty that revenge is. In fact, it turns on her and is much more damaging to her than the children whose snowman has been destroyed. In the third verse, she also avoids telling us why she's stealing. Sometimes I steal things I don't need, and there's perhaps a sense of puzzlement here that even she doesn't know why she's stealing things. I joyride cars sounds like an escape, but then the enjambment brings us straight to this unexpected to nowhere. And perhaps she doesn't understand why all this running gets her nowhere at all. She breaks into houses just to have a look. What is she looking for? Well, let's see what she finds when she gets in. She leaves a mess. Again, this idea of leaving pain behind for others. Maybe pinch a camera. This is narcissism again, obsessed with pictures of herself and how things look. And here she actually watches herself. I watch my gloved hand twisting the doorknob. And once more, we're filled with a sense of her vanity. A stranger's bedroom, mirrors. And so Duffy's labouring it here. She's really telling us this is what is going on constantly in the speaker's mind. She is obsessed with herself. I sigh like this. Ah. And again, look at the repetition of the I sounds. I sigh like this. This is all about me. And then the R, of course, is intended sarcastically. However, we might read it completely differently, and this could be a scream attacking herself. She doesn't realise quite why she's so angry with herself and the life that she's constructed, but we, the reader, do. Her unease is perhaps reflected in the fourth verse, because now she changes subject back to the snowman again. He didn't look the same, and again, this is the inability to look beneath the surface of things, and particularly beneath the surface of her own character. She's obsessed with how things look, but not how things really are. And there's a deliberate irony here between look and took. Stealing is a way of avoiding looking at herself. I took a run and booted him again, and I love this, these single word sentences, typical of Duffy, but also here give the character a really childish voice, and it's the voice, if you've had the pleasure of it, of Teletubbies. Again. Very childish, and shows just how spoilt this character is. My breath ripped out in rags, and so we can see just how damaging the stealing is to herself, not to the people she's stealing from. It seems daft now, and the word now shows just how little self-control she's got at the time. But look at this, not I seem daft now, but it seems daft now. She's getting closer and closer to understanding herself, but at the last minute pulls out. Then I was standing alone amongst lumps of snow, sick of the world. And we see here in the final line of the verse how she switches from blaming the I, the person responsible for what she's done, to the world. It's someone else's responsibility, and she's going to keep trying to get revenge on that world, even though that revenge keeps hurting herself. The solution to her loneliness and her boredom is revealed in the 5th verse, but it's a solution she fails to see. Mostly, I'm so bored I could eat myself. This is a wonderful metaphor for what the poem has been. She's completely destroyed the snowman, which is the mirror image of herself. One time I stole a guitar and thought I might learn to play, and I don't know how many teenagers' bedrooms you've seen, but I expect a good percentage of them are filled with electric guitars that the person's never learnt to play. And this is all about aspiration, isn't it? There's an image that I want to live up to, there's a status that I want, and I think if I acquire the possession, that will somehow give me that kudos, and it would somehow give me that skill. But of course it doesn't. But being a poet, Duffy is obsessed with language and communication, and here the protagonist wants to be like Shakespeare, wants to be brilliant with language and communication, but no, she's nicked it and then she's flogged it. She's had to sell it, but flogged also includes this idea of whipping and violence, and it reminds us just how much her violence is a way of not communicating. She's got rid of it. The snowman was the strangest. She still can't understand it, even once she's got to the end of the poem. We understand exactly why she's done it. She has no clue. You don't understand a word I'm saying, do you? Is therefore ironic, because maybe the listener is a psychiatrist or a policewoman or policeman, and they appear not to understand, but actually by the end of the poem we've got a very clear understanding, and the person who most needs it is the one who doesn't. It's the protagonist. If you found this helpful, please like the video on the YouTube channel, and if you'd like me to make videos differently and you have some suggestions about how I could do that, then please post a comment. I hope you found this useful. Good luck with your revision.